The sharp laugh echoed through the marble hall like a sharp blade. Ethan Hadley, the young billionaire heir to the Hadley tech empire, raised his glass and looked disdainfully at the girl in the simple dress whom the waiter had mistakenly led to the main table for the business dinner. "Sorry, dear, this place is for guests, not the cleaning lady," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some laughed, others looked down at their plates in embarrassment. She stood there, her eyes fixed on him, without saying a word. Someone tried to intervene, but Ethan raised his hand. She must be lost. Security? That was when she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and approached the table, without lowering her eyes. The previously noisy hall fell into an uncomfortable silence, and then she spoke. But not like a poor beggar, but with such unexpected authority that Ethan himself gasped. "I didn't come to clean anything today, Mr. Hadley," she said, her voice firm and perfectly articulated. "I came to present the project your fund rejected 6 months ago without even reading the proposal. And now, everyone here is about to hear what could have changed if they hadn't been so busy laughing at those who wear the least." Ethan's face paled. One of Japan's most prominent investors sitting next to her leaned over and whispered, "She's the one behind the Aurora project? That was great." Ethan stammered. All around him, expressions changed. What had started out as humiliation was now transforming before everyone's eyes. The humble girl he'd tried to ridicule was now speaking matter-of-factly about data, social impact, and sustainability with the precision of someone who knew the subject. Ethan didn't know it at that moment, but his empire had just begun to crumble, quietly, brick by brick. The Eden Gold Palace event hall was a universe unto itself. Crystal chandeliers reflected in glasses of expensive wine, muffled laughter between businessmen dressed in tailored suits and women in dresses that cost no less than the annual salary of a public school teacher. The night was one of those in which decisions that shaped the future of entire sectors were made in subtle conversations, between toasts and veiled agreements. At the center of it all was Ethan Hadley, the name that made the business newspapers vibrate, at just 33 years old, and with more than $2 billion accumulated between startups, acquisitions, and ruthless mergers. He smiled arrogantly and moved as if everything and everyone were under his control. His presence was not only noticed, it was imposed. No woman dared not to cast a glance. No competitor dared not to greet him. No waiter dared to get his order wrong. However, that night, one detail escaped him. Among the countless invitations sent to the fundraising ceremony and international expansion of his holding company, one name went unnoticed by him and his team. It was not a noble name, nor a surname with pedigree. It was simply Lena Duarte, written in simple letters with no title, no associated company, no photo in the registry. The assistant who was in charge of the screening thought about canceling, but the invitation had already been printed, and a system error had added her name to the honor roll. That was how Lena got in, not as a second-class guest, but as one of the 100 people authorized to circulate freely on the upper floor, where only major investors and strategic allies gathered before the announcement of the Hadley Group's new product line and acquisitions. She arrived early in silence. She chose a discreet navy blue dress, no brand, no shine, no heavy makeup. She walked cautiously between the security guards, and when she showed her name on the list, one employee hesitated, but her name was there in cold official letters. Aloud. While the others were impressed by the international buffet or the host's lively speech, Lena just observed. Her eyes passed over every face, every movement, as if deciphering intentions. She seemed out of place but not uncomfortable. She was there for a reason that only she knew. And when she met Ethan's eyes for the first time that night, he didn't recognize her. To him, she was just another girl trying to appear to be something she wasn't. The mood among the guests was euphoric. Ethan had just announced a merger with a European technology company that would double his profits in 2 quarters. The investors were toasting his genius. He was the golden boy, the prodigy. But at that very moment, Lena already knew that the real announcement of the night would not come from any of them. It would come from her voice. The world that Ethan knew was about to be confronted with something that not all his money could buy: dignity. The story did not begin when he sat down in the luxurious chair to receive the applause. It began now, when, without knowing it, he was about to publicly humiliate the wrong woman. And in this world where appearances are everything, sometimes a woman's silence can be more powerful than an empire. Lena learned early on that the world offered no kindness to those born on the wrong side of town. Her first home was a back room behind a bakery, where her mother, a woman with a low voice and a hunched back, washed floors and slept on a worn mattress that smelled of flour and sadness. Her father disappeared before she could even form her first sentence. All Lena knew about him came from a yellowed photo kept in a cookie tin, which her mother kissed on days of longing and hunger. At 7 years old, Lena already knew how to keep quiet when needed, to help without being asked, and to hide her tears when the milk ran out. Silence became her shelter. She never asked for more than life gave her, but she always believed that there was a hidden purpose behind suffering. The public school where she studied was better known for its graffitied walls than for its students' achievements. Even so, Lena was the one, who, even without a new uniform, kept her notebooks impeccable. She knew by heart the formulas that no one else could memorize and read books that she secretly borrowed from the community library. The principal even said that she had a grown-up mind, but no one believed that a girl like her would make it out of there. After all, daughters of cleaning ladies don't become engineers, much less researchers. At 15, she lost her mother, a silent stroke in the middle of the night. The only person who looked at Lena as someone with a future left without warning, and she was left alone with an empty envelope and the memory of a last handwritten note. Lena, no matter where you are, don't let anyone put you down. You are worth more than the world sees. With no one in the world, Lena sold sweets, cleaned bathrooms, carried boxes in supermarkets, and faced looks that always seemed to measure her worth by her clothes or her last name. But every penny she saved was saved with discipline. She didn't want luxury. She wanted a path, an opportunity. When she got a scholarship in a technology and innovation program for vulnerable young people, she didn't waste a second. She stayed up all night learning about artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and automation. While others slept, she silently sketched an idea that would change the environmental impact of factories in small towns. No one listened to her voice, but she learned to write. And with words, she built a project that was sent to 5 investment funds. One of them was Hadley Tech. The response, cold and impersonal, arrived less than a week later. The proposal does not meet the current criteria. Thank you for sending it. No careful reading, no response. Lena did not get angry. She simply understood that to be heard in that world, she would need to present herself the way they listen, live, in front of them, looking them in the eye. And it was fate, or perhaps something greater, that placed her among the giants. That night, the unexpected invitation, her name on the honor roll. She could have backed down. But something inside her, perhaps the echo of her mother's voice, whispered, "You are worth more than they see." And at that dinner, where the owners of the world thought they were untouchable, Lena prepared herself to no longer be just invisible. She was about to become unforgettable. The bet came between sips of expensive wine and the numbing boredom of men who no longer knew how to differentiate fun from arrogance. Ethan, surrounded by his 2 oldest partners, Blake and Carter, leaned forward as he surveyed the room. Everything was impeccable, except for one detail that bothered him: the presence of that young woman in a simple dress, standing near the bar, observing without smiling, without making conversation, without trying to impress anyone. "Who is that? She looks out of place," Blake commented, frowning. "Maybe a lost intern," Carter teased. Ethan twirled the glass between his fingers, and with a slight cynical smile replied, "Or maybe it's one of the new diversity program's bets. These NGOs are getting anyone into these events now." The disdainful tone drew muffled laughter. But soon the conversation turned to challenge. "Do you think she'd try to impress you?" Carter asked. She doesn't seem like the kind of girl who shuts up easily. Ethan gave a short, unconcerned laugh. Do you want to see how one of those idealists can be dismantled in 5 minutes? He said, leaning, his elbows on the table. I'll call her. I'll make her sit at the table. And when she thinks she's being accepted, I'll leave her flat on her back. Humiliated. She'll remember this for the rest of her life. It wasn't just vanity. It was a wounded ego over something that even he didn't understand. There was something in Lena's gaze that challenged him without a single word. A gaze that didn't admire him, didn't flatter him, didn't fear him, and that irritated him deeply. He was used to submissive gazes, gazes that asked for approval, but that firm gaze unhinged him. Ethan stood up with his usual elegance and walked to the bar. When he got there, he smiled with false courtesy and made a broad gesture with his hand. You look bored. Why don't you join us at the head table? We're few, but we're good at conversation. Lena hesitated for a moment. She knew something was wrong, but she also knew there was no room for retreat. She nodded lightly, as if accepting an invitation, and walked beside him to the large glass table illuminated by indirect light. When she sat down, she felt the eyes weighing on her shoulders. The women looked with mockery, the men with irony. But she kept her chin up, took a deep breath, and listened to Ethan's first sentences as if listening to someone reading a familiar script. He began by asking questions about where she was from, what she did, what college she attended. He feigned interest, but irony dripped from every comma. And do you really believe that these ideas about environmental impact work in the real world? He asked when she tried to briefly explain her proposal. Don't get me wrong, but saving the world with good intentions is something for teenagers. The phrase echoed, and some smiles appeared on the faces of others. Lena just watched. He was about to raise his voice. Ethan then stood up, raised his glass as if making a toast, and said loudly, To the idealists who forget that reality has numbers, not dreams. Everyone laughed. Lena remained silent. On the outside, she was calm. On the inside, the world she knew, of contempt, of stifled laughter, of exclusion, was coming back with full force. But this time, she would not bow her head. The silence that followed the sarcastic toast was brief but intense. Lena took a deep breath without touching the glass that had been served to her. Ethan sat down again, still smiling, but there was a slight uneasiness on his face. Perhaps he expected her to get up and leave, or to blush with embarrassment, mumble some excuse and disappear from his table like so many others he had humiliated for sport. But Lena remained there, firm, her eyes on his, not with anger nor with contempt. It was something worse for someone like Ethan, indifference. She didn't react like a victim nor like a rival. She just looked at him like someone who already knew him inside out, and that destabilized him. You don't seem very impressed, he said, as if trying to regain control. You should. It's not every day someone like you sits at a table like this. Lena tilted her head slightly. Someone like me? She repeated, without raising her voice. Ethan tried to keep his tone casual. I mean, someone who came from far away, who probably doesn't usually spend time in environments like this. But you carry yourself well. You learned quickly. Lena raised an eyebrow, as if listening to a child trying to sound grown up. Learning how to behave in front of someone who thinks they have the world in their hands is easier than it seems. Just watch how you make mistakes. The comment sounded like a sharp blow, but it was still said gently. Blake and Carter stopped laughing. Others at the table pretended to move their plates. Ethan, for his part, kept the smile on his lips, but his gaze was no longer the same. You seem to have something stuck inside you. Are you trying to say that you have something more valuable than our experience? He teased ironically. Lena kept her gaze fixed. Experience? No, but I have something that you still don't know how to recognize. And that's okay. Not everyone is born with eyes trained to see value where there is no pedigree. Ethan leaned back in his chair, intrigued. That woman spoke with too much confidence for someone who, until that moment, he had believed to be an opportunistic intruder. "Do you have a name?" he asked. "Or did you just come to observe and return the cutlery later?" Lena finally extended her hand across the table. "Lena Duarte. But the name doesn't matter now. What matters is that the reason you brought me here by mistake will become the only memorable moment of this evening." Ethan choked slightly on his wine. "Did we bring you by mistake?" he repeated. Lena just smiled. Life makes mistakes on purpose sometimes, to make the masks of those who think they own the truth fall. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a warning. And Ethan, although he didn't know it yet, was about to remember that. Face more than any signed contract. The waiter came over to clear the table. Lena stood up calmly. "I appreciate the invitation, but I didn't come to seek approval. I came to observe, and I've observed enough." When she turned, Ethan grabbed her arm. Not forcefully, but with an instinct that even he didn't understand. "You're not going to leave like this. At least tell me what you came here to do." She looked at his hand on her arm and, with a simple movement, freed herself. "You'll know. Everyone here will." And she left, leaving a thick silence in her wake, as if something had been broken, not in her, but in all those who had underestimated her. Lena's departure from the room did not go unnoticed. Some whispered, some laughed quietly, some just pretended not to see. But no one forgot, and Ethan even less so. He stood there for a few moments staring into space, still with the glass in his hand, his ego bruised, trying to turn into a joke what he could not understand. "She must be rehearsing some NGO talk," he said to break the silence, and the table responded with a mechanical laugh. But something in him had changed. It was unusual for someone to leave him talking alone, especially a girl in a nondescript dress, without an important last name, who did not even seem uncomfortable being in a place above her level, as he used to think. So, he did what he always did when he felt threatened. He exposed himself. Minutes later, on the stage in the center of the room, the mustache spotlights came on for the evening's announcement. It was the formal part of the ceremony, where Ethan would give a speech about Hadley Tech's future and reveal the new round of investment. He walked up the steps as if he were being cheered by a crowd, but his thoughts were still glued to Lena. He needed to somehow re-establish his image, show everyone that this strange presence was nothing more than noise, and he would do it in the cruelest way, with class. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice firm, his face as always, confident and impenetrable. "Today we celebrate more than financial achievements. We celebrate the natural filter that success applies to the world. Not everyone was made to be here, and sometimes, by mistake, the system opens the doors to those who don't know what to do when they enter." Shy laughter spread. "It happens. But it's good to remember that being in a room like this requires more than good intentions or poetic speeches about saving the planet." Eyes met, and many already knew who he was talking about even without mentioning names. The market is not a field of dreams. It's a battlefield, and only those who understand the rules stay. The comment provoked a wave of brief, nervous applause. Lena, who was still at the side of the hall standing next to one of the panels, heard everything. It didn't take long for her to understand. This was his attempt to erase her, to take away from her the brilliance that had dared to shine for a moment, among those who thought they owned the light. But she didn't move. She remained there, motionless, looking at him as if waiting for the stage to give way beneath the arrogant man's feet. Ethan finished his speech with a smile of victory. "So let's toast those who belong here, and let the others go back to theirs, with good stories to tell, if they have enough imagination." The humiliation was complete, refined, cold, and public. Some gave a standing ovation, others just drank in silence. Ethan had won once again, or so he thought. But something was wrong, because unlike other times he felt no pleasure. He had won, but he had not tamed this woman. And deep down, he knew it was not the end yet. Not with someone like her. Lena didn't leave. Not after the speech. Not after the mockery, not after the complicit silence of those who, even though they were uncomfortable, preferred to keep quiet. She remained motionless, but her gaze burned in a way that no one there noticed. No one except Ethan, who continued to pretend that he had closed the subject even as his eyes searched for her, almost unintentionally. It was as if something inside him refused to accept that she would simply disappear, swallowed up by shame. And he was right, because Lena wasn't the kind of woman who disappeared. She was just waiting for the right moment. And that moment began minutes later, when the main presenter of the event announced the next talk of the night. A brief presentation of social impact, ideas invited by international partners, a symbolic gesture, without great expectations, until the name was said, Lena Duarte. The microphone froze in the host's hands. There was a small scuffle among the stagehands. Ethan turned sharply, his eyes fixed on the sound man, then on the events team. But there was no mistake. Lena walked up to the stage with firm steps, each step like a hammer breaking the bricks of the wall that had always separated the untouchables from the invisible. She didn't use slides. She didn't have animated graphics, just her voice, her gaze, and a disconcerting serenity. "Good evening," she began. "Perhaps many of you here are wondering what a woman like me is doing in a place like this. I understand. I would wonder too, if I didn't know exactly what I was doing here." The tension in the room was palpable. For the past 3 years, I've been developing a project that transforms industrial waste into clean energy for isolated communities. I've received 4 rejections and absolute silence from 5 investment funds. One of them was Hadley Tech. She looked directly at Ethan without looking away. They haven't read the project, not a single line. But perhaps now they'll have the opportunity to hear it, since I'm here. Not by chance, not out of pity, but because I was selected by one of the international partners that today finances initiatives that are invisible to you. Ethan's face began to darken. The guests looked at each other. A Japanese investor took out his cell phone. A French woman took notes. "Today you laughed. You called me an intruder. You suggested that I should clean the silverware or go back to where I came from. And that's okay, because you don't know that people like me are trained by life to endure the laughter of those who think they're bigger. What you don't know is that we've been around for a long time, and we're ready for the time when your certainties crumble." The silence in the hall was absolute. Lena took a deep breath. "Today you gave me exactly what I needed. Attention. And with attention, the truth enters, and changes everything." When she stepped off the stage, no one moved. There was no forced applause. There was something more devastating, the silence of recognition. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. Even wrapped in the 1,000-thread count Egyptian sheets and the silent concrete walls of the penthouse that everyone envied, there was something in his mind that wouldn't shut up. The image of Lena speaking in front of everyone with such firmness wouldn't leave his eyes. It wasn't just the surprise of her being there, but the way her presence exposed him without shouting, as if her mere existence revealed the emptiness hidden behind her rehearsed speeches and bought applause. For the first time in years, Ethan felt small, and that, for someone like him, was a slow poison that ran through his fingers and soaked his pride. The next morning, still irritated by the inability to shake, the nagging feeling of having lost control the night before, he called his direct advisor. "I want everything about her, now. Name, CPF, where she was born, who she studied with, what she ate in the last 5 years. Everything." 3 hours later, the dossier arrived in his hands. When he opened it, he expected to find contradictions, inconsistencies, something he could use to mentally demean her. But he found something else. Silence and history. Lena Duarte, born in Springfield, daughter of Ana Duarte, a cleaning employee for the state hospital network. No registered father. Orphaned at 15. She studied on a scholarship, worked since she was 13. She created a pilot alternative energy program that supplied 3 public schools in the interior at 0 cost for 2 years. She received 3 academic awards abroad. All of them were rejected due to lack of a visa. She was rejected by 8 investment funds, but she insisted. And among the names of those who ignored her was that of Ethan Hadley. There was one last page in the file, a note from the assistant in blue ink. Interesting detail. Her mother, Ana Duarte, was an employee of your family for 12 years. She worked as a maid in the house of her grandmother, Donna Camille Hadley. Ethan froze. The memory hit him like a slow punch in the chest. He was 6 or 7 years old. He vaguely remembered a woman with a soft voice, sad eyes, and hands that were always sore from washing them so much. He remembered a day when she had been fired for defending a child who had been wrongly accused. That child was himself, accused of breaking a rare vase and blaming another employee. Ana Duarte had admitted the blame without hesitation, and she was fired. Ethan's stomach turned. He held the paper between his fingers as if it were made of glass. Lena wasn't a stranger. She was the daughter of the woman he had let lose her job, the woman who had been humiliated because of his childish lie. And now here was her daughter, years later, standing before him, not to exact revenge, but to remember. Not shouting, not accusing, just existing. And that was even harder to bear. Ethan felt for the first time that there was something no amount of money could erase, the echo of what we do when we think the world revolves around us. Lena disappeared as if she had never existed. After her speech, she was not seen at the cocktail party, nor did she appear in the official photos of the event. None of the guests knew where she went. She simply left, without fuss, without saying goodbye, without the arrogance that so many there displayed even though they had achieved nothing. And the more discreetly she disappeared, the more present she became. Ethan realized this the next morning, when he walked into his office and the employees suddenly stopped laughing when they saw him pass by. At meetings, glances would look away, greetings would be colder. There was something suspended in the air, as if everyone had witnessed something he could not control, and that was unbearable. On the 3rd day, he typed her name into the company's system. Nothing. He searched on social media, non-existent. He called contacts at other innovation companies. She turned down the offer, they said. She didn't want to continue in the program. Lena was purposefully hiding herself, like someone who refuses to be hunted. But in doing so, she became even more untamable. Ethan, accustomed to seeing women begging for attention, now found himself obsessed with the absence of one who wanted absolutely nothing from him. That hurt his pride more than any direct insult. Days passed and her silence became an uncomfortable sound inside him. He began to remember details that had previously gone unnoticed. The tone of her voice, the way she held his gaze, as if she saw beyond what he showed. He remembered the way she said, "You gave me what I needed." Attention. Like someone who had a plan bigger than revenge itself. A week later, Ethan found himself rereading the Aurora project, the one his company had rejected without even opening it. It was brilliant, meticulous, viable, the kind of idea that could revolutionize energy policy in developing countries. And his company had dismissed it out of sheer disregard, or worse, out of prejudice disguised as a strategic filter. That was the day Ethan realized. She hadn't disappeared, she had withdrawn, and in doing so, she had stripped him of the power he thought he had over everything. He couldn't buy her, find her, or apologize. He was completely powerless in the face of a woman who had never raised her voice, never asked for revenge, but who, with a single gesture, had torn off the mask of his public reputation. And the longer Lena was absent from his world, the more he realized how much space she had filled in his consciousness. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a lack. Not of a possession, not of a trophy, but of someone he had never even had, and who now, in a cruelly elegant way, was making him discover the pain of true emptiness. The downfall didn't come as a scandal in the newspapers or as an exposé with screaming headlines. It came in the cruelest way for someone like Ethan, silent, gradual, undeniable. It started with small signs, invitations that stopped coming, Meetings that had been confirmed were canceled without explanation. Messages that went unanswered from investors who had previously bowed to his every call. Ethan tried to ignore it, but it felt like he had been slowly pushed off center, as if all the eyes that had once been on him were now watching him with suspicion. He was still there, but his shine was starting to fade. The first loss came with the departure of a European partner who opted to fund a competing project, a project that, according to rumors, had been directly inspired by the model presented by Lena. Ethan tried to discredit the connection, but it was too late. The innovation community began to talk. Hadley rejected and tried to ridicule the best project of the year. He didn't listen because it was presented by a woman with no last name. Hadley Tech's arrogance is out of fashion. These were random phrases, spread across forums and networking groups, that began to create a new kind of narrative. One in which Ethan stopped being the visionary and became the example of what needs to be overcome. The following week, a video discreetly recorded by a guest at the business dinner went viral. In it, Lena is seen speaking on stage, her voice firm, and the caption read, "The woman who silenced millionaires with just one sentence." It was a clean, impactful edit that contrasted Ethan's cold, sarcastic speech with Lena's purposeful delivery. The video didn't show any direct humiliation, but the editing was clever enough to expose the imbalance. Comments piled up. Finally, someone has exposed the kind of arrogance that destroys good ideas. This woman is a giant. Ethan Hadley is the portrait of the old world. The partners began to back away. Carter asked for a temporary leave. Blake sold some of his shares and announced that he was focusing on personal projects. Internally, the team was divided between those who still tried to sustain Ethan's myth and those who were beginning to see the company as an outdated structure where talents like Lena's would never have a place. And, ironically, that was what tormented him the most. The truth wasn't in a headline or a lawsuit. It was in the collective silence that surrounded him. The kind of silence that can't be countered with money or ready-made speeches. It was the kind of judgment that no one announces, but that can be felt in every averted glance, every weak handshake, every forced compliment. Ethan, the man who had humiliated a woman because he thought she didn't belong in his world, was now the man everyone avoided because they realized he might never have belonged in the world he pretended to lead. And so, without Lena needing to say another word, the weight of the past, of arrogance, and of the truth finally began to push him to the ground he thought he would never touch. Ethan's days began to change almost imperceptibly. His alarm clock still went off at the same time, his designer clothes were still hanging in his closet in order of color, and his breakfast was still served on the same imported china. But he no longer ate. He sat at the table like someone watching an ancient ritual he was no longer a part of. His cell phone, once an extension of his body, now rested beside him with silenced notifications. He no longer opened messages in a hurry. He knew that almost none of them were from someone who wanted to be there. The loneliness, once covered by contracts and applause, finally showed its true form. Silence, indifference, and regret. Ethan began to revisit things he had never considered important. He reread old letters from his grandmother. He looked through childhood photos of him with employees whose names he could barely remember, including one of him sitting on the lap of Ana Duarte, Lena's mother, while eating birthday cake. The image of that woman's tired smile haunted him for hours. He remembered the lie he had told that day, the broken vase, the injustice, the dismissal. No one had held him accountable for it. No journalist had exposed the past. But it was as if Lena had reopened a wound that he himself had buried alive. For the first time, he saw himself not as the man who had built an empire, but as the spoiled boy who had destroyed silences with lies and never looked back. The transformation was not heroic. There were no speeches, no public journeys of redemption. It was silent, every day. He began to go alone to small events, to listen more than he spoke, to visit social projects to which he had previously only contributed out of fiscal obligation. She even found one of the schools supplied with energy by Lena's project. He stood at the gate for almost an hour, without saying who he was, watching, listening to the noise of the children running, the lights on in all the classrooms, the snacks being served. This was real. This worked. And he, with all his billions, had ignored it because he could not see value without a surname behind it. That night he returned home and sat in front of the window that overlooked the city. For the first time he cried, not out of anger, but out of emptiness, out of lucidity, out of non-performative regret. He cried for everything he had built on contempt, and for everything he could have changed if I had chosen to listen. It was strange, almost humiliating, to admit that the woman he had tried to shame in front of everyone had unintentionally become the cruelest and most necessary mirror of his life. She had not confronted him with screams or revenge. She had simply exposed him to his own shadow. And now, even though she was absent, she was the only one his soul longed to find. The reunion did not happen with an audience nor under spotlights, much less according to a rehearsed script. It happened the way deep truths appear, without warning. Ethan had discovered, through a letter sent by the curator of a European social project, that Lena was now working with rural communities in the interior of a South American country. No glamour, no photos, no public announcements. Just real, silent, transformative work. She was participating in the implementation of sustainable systems in regions where electricity was a luxury and water was a rare blessing. And even though he knew he had not been invited, Ethan bought the ticket. Not to redeem himself. He already knew that some things had no return. But because he needed to see her, not out of vanity but for something deeper, more raw. He wanted to look into the eyes of the woman who had shown him who he was, and perhaps who he could still be. He arrived in the village on a muggy morning, wearing the simple clothes he had bought at a local market. He walked, guided by one of the teachers who recognized his name and, even though she was surprised, led him in silence. The children ran around, wondering at the stranger with his sad eyes and hesitant steps. At the end of a trail, between trees and a shed where they were installing solar panels, he saw her. With her back turned, her hair tied up, her hands covered in dust and a smile on her face, as she taught a child how to connect the cables to a portable generator. It was another Lena. Or maybe she was exactly the same, far from the looks that tried to diminish her. It was her, full, whole, without the weight of anyone's approval. He didn't call out to her. He stood there, like someone afraid to interrupt something sacred. Lena felt his gaze. She turned slowly. There was no shock, no quick words. Just a silent acknowledgement, a long pause, and then a direct look. Ethan walked toward her. His eyes were moist, but there was no pretense, no pose, just the man who carried the burden of his own name on his shoulders. Lena didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. She just waited. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice hoarse. "Not for me, but for her, for your mother, and for you." She didn't answer right away. She just listened. And he went on. "Nothing I say can erase what happened, or what I did, or didn't do. But I wanted you to know that, after you, I learned to listen." Lena lowered her eyes for a moment. She took a breath. When she looked back at him, there was firmness, but no anger. "And what did you hear, Ethan?" she asked calmly. He took a moment to answer. "The echo of my own arrogance, and the sound of your dignity." It was only then that Lena allowed herself a small gesture. She nodded slightly. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something rarer. An acknowledgement. And in that brief moment, amidst the dust, the threads, and the gazes suspended in time, something between them changed. There was no longer the oppressor and the oppressed. There were two human beings facing their wounds, both transformed, albeit in different directions. The sun was already beginning to set over the landscape when Lena invited him to sit under the shade of a tree, where she used to write notes and review technical reports of the village's projects. There was no luxury, no chairs, just the dry ground and an exposed root that served as support. Ethan sat down with the care of someone who knows that any gesture out of tune could shatter that moment. She stood for a few seconds looking at the horizon, her arms crossed lightly, the breeze moving her loose hair now, as if the wind knew she needed space to decide. And then she turned to him, not harshly, but firmly. "I thought a lot about what I would do if you ever came after me," she said, her voice unadorned. "I imagined 1,000 versions. In some I would scream. In others I would turn my back. In almost all of them, I wanted you to feel the pain I felt. But now, looking at you, I don't feel anger. Just tiredness." Ethan lowered his eyes. Not out of shame, but out of respect. Lena continued, "You are not the only one responsible for everything that happened to me. The whole world helped push me to the margins. But at that dinner, on that stage, you had the chance to choose to be different, and you chose to repeat the pattern, to laugh, to despise, to remain silent." There was a pause. The wind stopped for a moment, and she sat down across from him. "But what struck me most was not your arrogance. It was the silence afterward. You did not respond in kind. You listened. And that, Ethan, is not common." He looked into her eyes, and what he saw was not forgiveness nor affection. It was something rarer. Truth. Lena took a sheet of paper from the notebook next to her, wrote something brief, folded it, and handed it to him. "This is the name of the school where my mother worked before she died. I renovated the wing where she volunteered. If you ever want to do something for her, real things, not with money, go there. Listen to the children, help without being seen. Do for someone what you didn't do for me." He held the paper as if it were too fragile to fold. Lena stood. There was no hurt on her face, there was freedom. "I won't hate you, Ethan, but I won't stay either." He tried to stand, to say something, anything. But she only smiled slightly. "We don't have to be close to leave marks. And mine, you'll carry for a long time." She turned and walked back to the shed. All around her, children were returning from the trails covered in dirt but laughing loudly. The sound of them was louder than any applause Ethan had ever received. He sat there, paper between his fingers, his body still, his chest full. There was no easy redemption, no automatic start over. But there was a choice before him. And for once, the choice didn't involve deals or contracts or control. It involved silence and listening and humility. And he knew, without her having to say it, that this was the only path forward. Months later, a rainy afternoon descended on the city where it all began. The fogged-up windows of the old state school reflected the gray sky. But inside one of the classrooms, a group of children laughed loudly, painting with their hands on improvised cardboard. Among them, a man in a simple shirt, mud-stained pants and shoes left at the door, helped a girl clean her fingers stained with green paint. He didn't say his name. He didn't give orders. He just listened. He watched. He was there, whole, but silent. Sometimes he would disappear for hours into the storage room to fix a broken chair or replace a loose tile in the shed in the courtyard. Other times, he would just read quietly to a boy who couldn't sleep. At the back of the room, hanging on the recently renovated wall, was a small, hand-carved wooden plaque. Ana Duarte Room, where the light that the world insists on extinguishing begins. No one knew who had it made. No one asked. But every day when the light in that room was turned on, it shone in a special way, as if it knew that even those who have passed on continue to transform the world when they leave seeds in the right place. On the last page of a notebook forgotten on the table, a loose sentence written in colored pencil read, "Sometimes it is in silence that justice is served." The man read it, closed the notebook, looked out the fogged-up window and, for a moment, smiled, not like someone who had won, but like someone who had finally understood. If you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you somewhere deep down. Write here in the comments, "I believe in silent justice," just so we know you stayed until the end and felt it. Don't forget to like this story if it touched you in any way. It helps us to continue telling stories that deserve to be heard. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take the opportunity to be part of this community that believes that the greatest transformations begin in the invisible. And now, the video that's playing here on the screen is for you who believe that a woman's silence is never weakness. It's contained strength. Click and continue with us. This next story will give you goosebumps.